to everyone who filled out the survey. It's useful to get a bit of background. What I'd like to do first, just to make sure we're all on the same page, is to just give a quick introduction to Microsoft Teams for those that may not have seen it or those who are less familiar with it. So Microsoft's definition for the product is the hub for teamwork in Office 365. And what it brings is the ability to allow a group of people to work together in a single application, bringing conversations, files, and other tools into a single place. So traditionally, when I would be working with a group of people, we would be using a combination of email, calendars in Outlook, SharePoint for files, Skype for meetings, possibly even a file server for some types of documents. And obviously that means there wasn't a single location for the group of people to go to work on that project. If I just go across into Teams now and show you an example, here I have a team, the Mark 8 project team. So this is for a group of people working on the Mark 8 product. And you can see here we have a set of channels for different topics relating to this project. So if I go into the research and development channel, I can see here all of the conversations that have taken place for that particular topic. So if, for instance, we go back up here and Lydia Holloway has put a PowerPoint presentation in here with some design proposals, and I can click and expand and I can see the conversations that relate to that document. I can elect to open the document. It's a PowerPoint document and I can still see the conversation here, so I can add some new comments. So this is really the kind of power of Teams that if I was in my old world of using Outlook with email, calendars, SharePoint for documents, and Skype for meetings and instant messaging, I would have to go in and out of those tools just to achieve that single task that I've done there. Okay. So my first tip, there is a tool in Microsoft Teams called Tbot, and Tbot is a tool that provides a lot of useful information, both for new users to Teams and experienced users. I, for instance, use it fairly regularly to find out new features that have been added to the product. Let me just show you an example of Tbot in action. So if I go into Teams and I go into chat, one of the people I can chat with is Tbot. And if I go and look at Tbot, you can see here we have some tabs. And the first most useful tab are these videos. There's about 15 minutes worth of videos here. And I would absolutely encourage you to go and watch each of these videos. It will be 15 minutes of your time well spent. It is the perfect introduction to the product. It is a perfect introduction to some of the key features of the product, and it will save you reading reams of Microsoft documentation that goes into a lot of technical detail about Teams. These are excellent. Not only are they excellent, but they are updated and maintained by Microsoft, so they are pretty much up to date in line with where the product currently is. Putting aside the introductory videos, there is also some FAQs. Again, these are updated and are fairly useful, and a detailed help file. Now let's face it, very few people want to go through a help file and find what they want. They just want to ask a question. So if I go into the conversation tab here, I can converse with Tbot as if it was a person. So I can say, how can I create a new team? And hopefully it's going to come back and answer my question. So here's another thing on how to create a new team. How can I add a new channel? Helps if I spell it. and so forth. So this is a great tool, and it's one thing that I would actively encourage you to look at. And also, if you're thinking about adoption and how you train users, this is the primary resource I would encourage your end users to use to get up to speed with Teams. Okay, so my next tip. Teams works very well across both the browser, the desktop on both Windows and Mac, and also mobile on iOS and Android. And each of those apps has a use. So for instance, when I'm sitting at my laptop, I'm probably primarily using the desktop app for Teams. However, I spend a lot of the time out and about, and my primary communication device is actually my mobile phone. So I use the Teams app on my mobile phone to keep up to date with projects that I'm working on. So here is my mobile phone, and you can notice here that I have a tile for Teams, and that has a little indication saying there's a couple of things that I probably want to have a look at. So I'm just going to go into that. Now, obviously, the screen space available on a mobile device is very much smaller than on the desktop or the browser, but it still gives me full functionality. So if I'm looking at here at my projects and I scroll down and I go to my Mark 8 project team, I can click into research and development. I can scroll back up to the same PowerPoint presentation that I showed you before. I can expand on the conversations. And if I want to review a document, say this Word document here, the Contoso quadcopter camera proposal, I can click on that. It's going to open the document in the Word app on my device. And I can pretty much go in there and read it. And actually, if I want to, I can start making changes to it. So it pretty much means that I'm kept in the loop with what the team's talking about, but I can also access all the files and content when I'm out and about. Now, there are a couple of things to be aware of in terms of some of the capabilities that are and are not available between the different apps, the desktop and the browser. So for instance, if you want to do desktop sharing, so if I go to Megan here, and I call Megan, who's not going to reply because Megan's not there at the moment, then I can't do desktop, I can't do sharing currently from the mobile device. And likewise, if I'm using a browser other than Edge as of today, I can't also do desktop sharing. All of these things are being resolved, but it's something to be aware of depending on what features are most useful to you. Okay. So my next tips relate to channels and chat. And this always causes quite a lot of conversation when people are first rolling out Teams. So the question is, well, what channels should we create? What should we call them? Should they be standard across all of our teams? And the answer in reality is that the channels are useful for grouping together conversations around a similar topic. So if I go into one of my teams here, what you will see is that for my Mark 8 project team, the channels that have been created relate to the topics specifically to this project. Engineering, so we have some activities relating to engineering, manufacturing, marketing, and research development. However, if I take this next team here, the X1050 launch team, our topics are slightly different because they relate to the nature of the project. So for here, we're doing a launch project for a product, and we're creating some digital assets for the web, and we're creating a marketing plan, but we have some legal and compliance things to consider. So the topics are really relevant to the nature of the team itself. Now, a couple of other things that are important, and I probably see this next thing more common than anything else when people start using Teams. If you have a look here, Adele said, here's my Mark 8 overview document, could use some help with the specifications and suppliers list. And what people typically do is they go straight down to the bottom and say, let's just say, okay, I can help. Now, what you're actually doing there is you're creating a new conversation. You're not replying to the one that's already there. Now, it can be a little bit confusing to get used to, but if you are replying to a conversation that already exists, use the reply option, not the option to start a new conversation. And in that way, your conversations will keep in context. So if I go back up here to the further up to the chain of conversations, I've got something that Patty's talked about, and if I click in replies, I can see all the conversations relating to that conversation, sorry, all the replies, and I can reply to that as opposed to starting a new conversation. The next thing that I see people do is if they're writing a conversation and they want to put some multiple lines in it, what they tend to do is press enter. Now, if you press enter, this is what happens. Okay, it posts it. It's basically enter is a quick way of posting what you're saying. So a couple of tricks for you here. Firstly, if you just want to post something quickly, it's right here. If you press shift and enter, it'll give you a line feed. It seems a little thing, but I see a lot of conversations with teams with people who are just getting used to it that are just a lot of single lines of conversation. The next thing is if you really want to compose a post that's a bit more detailed, use this option down here. So if I use this option down here, not only do I get some additional composition options like bold, italics, and so forth, but now when I press enter, it actually just gives me a new line anyway. Okay, so again, seems like a minor thing, but it really helps to make sure that you keep conversations in context and you don't add lots of new topics when you're typing. Okay, so a couple of other things. I'm going to be talking about notifications in a minute, but if you really want someone to respond to something and you want to make sure they see it, it's very important that you mention their name. So I use the @ symbol and I'm going to say @James. And that will be important because if I go across to my mobile device and scroll down, you can see there that it's popped up as a notification on my mobile device. And if I go into Teams, it will also appear as a notification to me there. Okay. You don't have to mention someone, but if you actually want to think of it like physically poke them, then an @ mention is a good way to do it. Okay. So that's conversations within a team. Something that often gets overlooked and is a very powerful feature of Teams is private and group chats. So these are the type of scenarios where you don't necessarily want to set up a team. You want to have a conversation with one or more people. You don't need the permanence of a team, but you don't want to revert back to using email. So you want to use the chat features of Teams, but you don't want to set up a team. And this is where private and group chat comes in. So let me show you a quick example. I'm going to go into chat. And I'm going to create a new chat. And I'm going to start this chat with James. Okay, now I'm already had a chat with James, so it's saying this is what you previously spoke about. So I'm going to say, can you help me with these figures, please? So that's going to appear to James, and James can respond to that. And the nice thing about this is James can either respond in real time because he happens to be online, or as and when he gets online, he can go in and then respond to the conversation. And all the time, that chain of conversation is retained. So I have an ongoing history of that chat conversation that I had with James. Now, this can be very useful if you're maybe want to converse with a couple of people. So I've got an example here. I'm trying to arrange a team away day, and I'm involving a couple of people, Alex and James. And what I've done here is I've given the chat a name, so I've just called it Team Away Day. And James has suggested that it might be nice to have the Team Away Day in Venice. So I'm just going to change the name of this Team Away Day in Venice. And what you can see is that chat is remembered, so I can get back to it at any time. And any of the people can participate in the chat. So should we go in April? It's crowded. And all those people will be notified, okay? And they can then take part in that chat. So I use this a lot myself to replace what I previously would have done with long convoluted email chains. And the great thing here is that anyone joining this chat can see the chat history of what was talked about before. So you don't have to store all the emails in a public folder. You can access them easily from your mobile device. It really does allow you to chat with your colleagues in a way that email just doesn't deliver. So the last thing, and this is probably one of the most important areas to consider, is if you compare Teams to your inbox in Outlook, your inbox in Outlook, you will receive an email whether you are CC'd or directly notified within an email. So pretty much you get everything there. And that can be both good and bad. Teams isn't like that. You have to take responsibility of a user to decide what it is that you want to be notified of. So let me kind of explain. If I go back to my site here, sorry, my Teams app here. So I'm logged in as Megan, and Megan's involved in quite a few projects. So you can see the projects that Megan's involved in. So the first thing is Megan needs to decide which of the projects are most important to her. So you can see we have this concept of favorites and more. And basically all this does is allow Megan to sort the team workspaces she's involved with to be appropriate for her kind of what's important to her. So if I make this product launch event a favorite, it goes up to the top. If I make this one not a favorite, it moves down. Now making it a favorite or not has no impact apart from moving it up and down in the list. Likewise, I can pick up, say, the launch team and say, you know what, this is the most important one. I'm going to put it at the top of the list. And therefore, it always appears at the top of the list. Okay, and this is particularly important when you think about using a mobile device. So if I go across to my mobile device here, when I log into Teams, I really don't have a lot of space. So one of the things that I do using the screen here is decide which of the projects are important, what order they should be in, and which are my favorites. So those are the ones I focus on more than the others. Now, the next thing that I can do is I can decide which of the channels within a team is important. And again, different people will have different views of what's important. So if I go into the Mark 8 project team, you can see here that I've tagged engineering and research and development as the most important channels to me. Now, what does that mean? It means that when I look at the team, those are the two topics that I see at the top of the list. I'll always see general, by the way. You don't get a choice in that. But those are the other two. If I am interested in the other ones, well, I can see them down here, two other channels, but they're not displayed by default. So it allows me to focus my attention on what's important. The other thing that I can do, if I go back to a channel, is I can elect to follow a channel. Now, this always causes confusion with people. What's the difference between making a channel a favorite and following a channel? When you make a channel a favorite, you're literally bumping it up the list of channels. If you follow a channel, you will be automatically notified of any posts added to that channel, irrespective of whether you've been mentioned or irrespective of whether you've been involved in that conversation at all. Now, let me kind of talk about how you get notified. So I'm just going to go across to a different user. And this is Alex. And I just want to highlight some of the things here that denote a user being notified of things going on. So the most important one is in the top left corner, you see activity. And if I go into activity, it's telling me there's 4 things. And this will kind of bring together those things that I have specifically said I want to be notified. Okay, so I've missed a couple of calls here, and there are some notifications of other things. If I go back to Teams, you notice the Teams has a little red @ sign. That's telling me that I have been mentioned directly in a team. And I know that's engineering here. It's got the 1 by it. That's telling me the number of times I've been mentioned. So if I go into there, I'd find a mention. I've got some other notifications here as well. So you notice that knowledge share here is in black, and this one's pipeline's not in black. This is telling me there's new conversations in here. Now, all of this is kind of important. The default settings are very good, but you as a user can control how and when you get notified. So if I go over to the corner and I click settings, the users themselves can decide how they get notified. And there's a few things here, banner and email. So if you're really not using Teams very much, just occasionally, setting it to email is quite useful because you will get an email notification if you don't go into Teams to have a look at it. But if you are using Teams quite a lot, there's no relevance in having the email. And likewise on my mobile phone, what you can do is you can specify what things you get notified of on my phone. So similar set of settings, and likewise with your phone, decide whether you get notified all the time. If you're actually using the desktop, don't notify me, and so forth. So these are things that are quite important to understand. Like everything that I've just covered, I'll just go back to TBot. All of it is covered in TBot in the videos that are there. So there is one of the videos here talks about notifications. Somewhere in here, productive conversations, and this talks about that, and Teams and channels talks about how you can set up your notifications to be useful. Okay, so that's pretty much a very quick summary of the things that I would suggest to make your use of Teams more effective. I am just going to have a look through some of the questions. So for anyone who's leaving now who doesn't want to stay around for the Q&A, thank you very much for taking part in the survey. And a video of it will be available shortly. So let me just look, see if anyone's asked any questions. No. Okay. Okay, so a couple of questions I was asked previously prior to this call that might be of interest to you. Firstly, what licenses do I need to use Microsoft Teams? Quite a common question. Pretty much it's included with any of the business, academic, government and enterprise plans. So pretty much every plan you can think of. There are some limitations if you are hosted in the US government tenancy, but apart from that, you are more than likely to have access to Teams. Another question I get asked is, if I use Teams, do I need to use SharePoint? The answer to that is yes, because Teams uses SharePoint by default as its repository to store all of the documents. You don't have to use SharePoint. There are some other options, but that's the default setting. Can I work with external users? Yes. In fact, my demo there involving James and Megan, they are both from completely different organizations. And so you can invite external users into a team and allow them to participate within the team's conversations and file sharing. Some of the capabilities that you've seen may seem very similar to Skype for Business. And it is very important to understand Microsoft's strategy is that Teams will replace Skype for Business at some point. All of the capabilities that are available within Skype for Business will be available within Teams before the end of this year, plus obviously all the other capabilities that Teams provides. So if you are yet to roll out Skype for Business, or you've got a very small deployment of it, I would definitely encourage you to consider looking at Teams and assess whether the capabilities in Teams as of today can meet the requirements that you want to deliver with Skype. One final one, is there a requirement to have your Exchange mailboxes in Exchange Online? The answer is actually no, but it does make it very much easier if you do have your mailboxes in Exchange Online, although it is not mandatory. Okay, so if no one's got any other further questions, thank you very much for everyone for joining this webinar. If there is a follow-up at some point. Okay. So a question, if you're working outside of Teams, how do you find out someone who has mentioned you? So I'm going to interpret that to say that if you are not a member of a team and someone who is a member of that team tries to mention you, how do you get notified? The answer is you can't mention someone unless they are a participant within that team. So they wouldn't be able to mention you. Can you get pop-up notifications on your desktop? Yes, you can. So if I just go to my, you'll notice this in a minute, because if I send James a notification, he will get a pop-up because I'm logged into my laptop as James. So if I ask James a question, and what's quite nice is you can actually respond in the pop-up. Okay. Let me just check the questions. All right, just going to go to the top of the questions. Okay, so how about an option like, we have been trying Teams, but it doesn't do what we require yet? Yeah, I'd need to know what it is you're trying to do with that to be able to answer that. Okay. Are your settings, yes, so are your settings replicated across all platforms? Yes, they are. So your notification settings are. The only difference is on your mobile, the actual app has some unique settings that controls how your mobile will actually surface notifications to you, whether you want them to appear on the lock screen. Do you need the desktop application installed for pop-ups? That's a great question. I can't give you a definitive answer. I'm going to say that you don't, but I can't guarantee that. The reason why I say that is I use Teams quite often on machines that I'm not logged into the desktop app, yet I still get the pop-ups, but I would need to check that. Is there a limit on the number of people you can have on a video call? I believe I will check because it's changed recently. There is definitely a limit. I know with a conference call, the limit's currently about 200, but I'm not sure on the video call. How do I browse to a file that I previously uploaded to Teams? So there's a couple of ways you can do that. Firstly, if you know the team you uploaded it to and the channel you uploaded it to, you can go directly to the tab within the channel. Alternatively, if you click on Files and go to Recent Files here, it will list recent files that you've added or updated. Another way you can do it is on your Office 365 homepage. There is something called Recent Documents on the homepage, and that will list documents that you've uploaded to Teams or SharePoint or OneDrive, actually anywhere within the environment. So if you really actually no idea where you put it, that's a good starting point to find it. I think that was the last question. Okay, can you block users from creating teams or channels? So the owner within a team can elect to control what people can do within that team. So if I go into my Mark 8 project and I go to Manage Team and I go to Settings, the owner can control what people can and can't do, including creating new channels. By default, everyone within your organization can create a team. So probably not something to get into with this call because it's something we recommend you allow people to do, but you do have to think about some governance and control and some lifecycle management if you do go with that default setting. Okay. So thank you everyone for the attending the call. We hope you found it useful and hope that you'll join our next webinar. Thank you.